Thank you for having me, and thank you, Chiefs, for being on hand. It's nice to see all of you again. And let me get started. I changed what I was going to do today, and I changed it in light of the way the discussion has gone up to this point. So what I thought I'd do is just kind of rummage through some things I brought with me and try to connect a bunch of pieces together. And so if you'll bear with me, let me start with climate, go to urban centers, cities next, and end up with what I call a kind of, city as an ecosystem. It's not a bunch of isolated things, okay, is the point. But let me start with the climate, and specifically with respect to the topic at hand, agriculture. I did some work, some research prior to coming to this event to see what the latest science was out there. And lo and behold, there's a bunch of new research that's been looking at crops, in particular those where we derive most of our calories. Something on the order of 75% of our calories come from things like wheat, maize, rice, and soybeans. Well, it also turns out that the growing season in all of these growing regions of the countries of the world, their temperature is going up. And that's been noted now, a significant uptick in the temperature during these growing seasons between 1980 and 2008, whereas between 1960 and 1980 and get my figures right here. Anyway, since 1980, the temperatures have been going up significantly, so much so that the yields from those 4 crop varieties, at least 3 of them, are beginning to be affected negatively. In other words, they're not getting as much yield now, and the reason that people think is the case, based on these studies, is the recent uptick in temperature. So we're getting less than the yields that we thought we would because the temperature is going up in the crop growing region. So we have that one problem to deal with. So, a reasonable question at that point would be, well, what's the future look like in terms of temperature on the global scale? Well, not good. In a word, we are, according to the last IPCC set of projections, where they look into the future out to 2100 and estimate what the temperature is likely to be based on a variety of things, how we live, how our economy goes, this, that, and several other things. And it turns out that based on evidence acquired last year, looking at what our growth in carbon emissions are and carbon, so forth, we're on a trajectory to meet the worst case scenario. Okay, we're not doing well. I mean, all these examples are great, but when you go back to the, look at how we're doing in terms of carbon emissions in the atmosphere, not good. We're on a pathway to get to nearly 4 times CO2. We're worried about doubling, but here we are on a pathway to get to 4 times the pre-industrial levels of CO2. Now, the Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Laboratory at Princeton years ago did a simulation of what a 4 times CO2 world would look like. And that world is so radically different. I brought an image of that with me, but I'm not going to show it to you. It's so different from the world we live in today. It's sort of like looking into Alice in Wonderland's rabbit hole. I mean, we don't recognize it because it's warm everywhere. And so we're on that path, though. That's the point, and the focus here is agriculture. And those warming trends and the growing belts are already beginning to affect productivity. And so the question looms large. Where are we going to get our food? And can we address the growth in the population at the same time? So that's one piece. The other piece I wanted to talk about, as I said before, was urban population growth. We're on a trajectory now to, by 2050, reach 70% of the people living on the face of the earth in 2050 are supposed to be living in cities. That growth in urban population is largely going to come from rural areas in developed countries. The developed world urban populations appear to remain the same if we believe the projections. So most of that growth is in developed countries which are facing huge inequity issues as it is. It's not to say that we are not here in the developed world facing such issues as well. Up to 80% of the expected 80 to 100 billion cost per year to address adaptation issues in cities, to address adaptation across the board, 80% of that is supposed to be in cities. So most of that adaptation is going to take place in cities, and most of the cost is going to be in cities. Most of the downside of that is likely to occur in developing country cities, which are likely to bear 75% of the damage costs. Talked about the population. 3 million people per week in urban centers, growing as we speak. And the last piece here I wanted to get to, if you would show the slides, and I'll finish up real quick. It's this idea that, that cities aren't just kind of things where you plunk this down, you do that, you have this piece here. It's a kind of ecosystem of its own, and it can range from totally dysfunctional as an ecosystem to one that functions to do a lot of things. It provides food, provides a means of getting to that food. It provides a means of getting to that food at a reasonable cost that doesn't limit your access versus somebody else's access to that food supply. It's a number of things, and that's the point I want to make. Up to this point, I think we've put people last in the planning process with cities. And the next slide, please. And I think the cities of the future, at least the ones we're talking about here today, that maybe are the cities of 2050 and beyond, I think have to be ones that put people first. In other words, what do people want their cities to look like? What do they want to be able to do there? And how easy will it be for them to do it? And I think all of those questions are really important as we begin to sort of grapple with concepts like the plantagon and other related things, because those things don't exist by themselves, and access to them is critical. And so transportation looms large. It is the glue of cities. How bad it is, we all know when it's bad, it's bad. Here in Washington, we have a hell of a time getting from A to B because our roads are clogged. And it costs a lot of money. The Dulles Toll Road, for example, is almost too expensive to use anymore. And so there are ways in which we have to design these if we want to grapple with the issues like equity, access for everybody to food at an affordable price, and access to cities, and cities we want to be in, cities we want to shop in, we want to work in, we want to do this. We want them to be appealing. So we have to engage people in a discussion up front about what would make that happen. How would it be appealing to you? How do you see yourself functioning in this city? What do you need? What kinds of services? Next slide. I'm just going to run through a couple of slides here. Next slide, please. These are from India, and they're basically situations now compared to what it could be. Next slide. Yeah, keep rolling along. This is one place that's an artist design of what that same setting could look like again. Here's a turnabout in a highway system, and you got this underpass here. Next slide. And here it is converted into something really appealing, walkable, reachable. It's nice. Next slide. Urban lakes. Next slide. Turning a dump into an urban lake and a walkway and stuff like this. Next slide, please. Multiple use for everything. Next slide. I want to end with one. Keep going. One more. Okay. Here's the city of Ahmedabad in India, just outside of Delhi. They have just started this bus rapid transit system. This is the way it looked like before they implemented the system. Next slide. Here's what it looks like now. Dedicated lanes, walkways, bikeways, buses that are really high quality. They have a system. It's very scheduled. People can get there. They want to be there. They walk there. They can do things. They don't have to have a car. Anyway, you get my point. Thank you.